Genesis chapter 41, and we're looking here at the life of Joseph. As we're thinking about that, let me ask you a question. Does anybody in here have any problems? Is there anybody in here problem-free? No problem whatsoever. No problems, nothing's going on adverse. Joseph's life was marked by problems. I mean, he lived in a problem household. I mean, can you imagine the dysfunction that was in his house? His dad had 2 legal wives plus 2 what we would call girlfriends. They were concubines, but it was it's a bad situation. He grew up in that. He grew up in that jealousy and envy. He grew up in the divisiveness that was there in that home. He had brothers who hated his guts. I mean, his brothers despised him. They never said a kind word to him, probably. They hated him so much that they wanted to kill him. They took him and threw him into a pit, and then they wanted to kill him, but one said, no, let's don't do that. Let's just sell him and take the money instead. Listen, that's a big problem, isn't it? And so they sell him into slavery. He's off into a foreign land. He knows no one. He can't speak the language, probably. He's got problems. Then he's in this house of a guy named Potiphar. He's falsely accused of rape. He's thrown into prison. He's got problems. And that's how life is, isn't it? We get problems in life, but now there's something going to take place in Joseph's life. Something wonderful now in chapter 41 is going to transpire. And so we know that Pharaoh had this dream and no one could interpret the dream. And so finally the butler remembered, hey, there's a guy I was in prison with who was able to interpret my dream. And maybe if we bring him in, perhaps he can tell you, Pharaoh, what the dream's all about. Sure enough, they bring him in. He hears what Pharaoh has to say, and he gives the interpretation. On top of that, he tells him not only the interpretation of it, but he tells him how to get through all this bad stuff that's going to happen. And with that, in chapter number 41, look at verse number 37. So the advice was good in the eyes of Pharaoh and in the eyes of his servants. And Pharaoh said to his servants, can we find such a one as this man in whom is the Spirit of God? Then Pharaoh said to Joseph, inasmuch as God has shown you all this, there is no one as discerning and wise as you. I'm sure Joseph can't believe what he's hearing. This reinforcement, this positive reinforcement that he's hearing from Pharaoh is news to his ears. So you shall be over my house. Do you think maybe Joseph is dumbfounded? Do you think he's saying, can you come again with that? Can you repeat yourself? I can't believe what I'm hearing. That's a moment like that. I can't believe what I'm hearing. You shall be over my house, and all my people shall be ruled according to your word. And I'm sure maybe Joseph's looking around. He's got to be talking about somebody else. Only in regard to the throne will I be greater than you. And Pharaoh said to Joseph, see, I have set you over all the land of Egypt. And then Pharaoh took his signet ring off his hand and put it on Joseph's hand. And he clothed him in garments of fine linen and put a gold chain around his neck. And he had him ride in the second chariot, which he had. That's like Air Force Two, okay? and had him right in that. And they cried out before him, bow the knee. So he set him over all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh also said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man may lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath-Paneah. And he gave him a wife, him as a wife, Asenath, the daughter of Potipherah, priest of On. So Joseph went out over the land. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. Now, listen, Joseph, whose life was always full of problems and turmoil. Hey, now Joseph has the job. So surely all of his problems are over. Joseph has the position. So surely all his problems are over. Joseph has the mansion, the house. Surely all his problems are over. Joseph has all the money he could ever want. So surely all his problems are over. Joseph has a family. He has a wife now and will soon have 2 children, 2 boys. Ephraim and Manasseh, who will one day be named for the tribes of Israel. I mean, surely every problem now in Joseph's life is gone. I mean, because that's how we think, isn't it? If I just had that job, my problem would be over. If I could have that house, my dream house, my house at the beach, my house in the mountains, whatever. If I just had that, all my problems would be gone. If I just had that job, if I had that money, if I had a bank account that was just full and I didn't have to worry about anything as far as financial problems again, everything would be over. No problems for me. So when we look at Joseph's life, we have to ask ourselves, is Joseph in his life, are all his problems gone? No. All his problems weren't gone, as we're going to see here in a moment. And the truth is, no matter what we get our eyes on, no matter when we get that thing we so desired to get, be that job, be that house, be that the windfall of money, whatever it may be, does that mean the end of all of our problems? No. There are young people sometimes thinking, you know, if I just had that marriage, if I could get my man, if I could get my girlfriend or whatever, then I wouldn't have any more problems. Is that the truth? No. Sometimes you get more problems you bargain for. Because everybody has baggage, don't they? We all bring our baggage into our relationships. And so I want you to look at life. I want us to look at Joseph's life and a couple of areas that he still had problems. And maybe you may even have some problems. And the first one revolves around his job. And we'll call it the famine, but it's really his job, or that we can put it both ways. In chapter 41 and verse number 53 and 54, then the 7 years of plenty which were in the land of Egypt ended, and the 7 years of famine began to come. Now remember, in the dream, Joseph interpreted that here's what's going to happen, Pharaoh. You are going to have 7 years of plenty like you've never seen before. I mean, all the wheat is going to come in. There's going to be an abundance of food. It's just going to grow. You're not going to know what to do with it. It's going to be 7 years of plenty like you've never seen before. And it was Joseph's idea, let's not just let it grow, but we want to take some of it and put it back for a rainy day, because it's coming. But here's what happened. In those 7 years of plenty, Do you think maybe some people kind of got it in their mind? They forgot about the 7 years of famine that were coming, and maybe they got it in their mind, hey, it's always going to be this way. Maybe even Pharaoh got to that point. You ever thought about that? That maybe he even began to think, hey, all of this is coming in. Maybe Joseph was wrong about the 7 bad years, and maybe he put it all out of his mind, but then just as sure as you can turn off a spigot, the blessings ended, and the 7 years of plenty ended, and now there's complete famine. And maybe Joseph maybe there were people pressuring him in his job. Maybe he was feeling the pressure from Pharaoh. Maybe he was feeling the pressure from people. See, there comes a time when famine gets into our lives. It doesn't mean that God doesn't love us. It doesn't mean that God is punishing us. What it does mean is that God is wanting to teach us something. Same thing happened to Elimelech and Naomi in the book of Ruth. A famine came in the land, and instead of them staying there and living through it and learning through it, they looked for where the grass was greener, so they thought. And they went to Moab, the place of no blessings, and we know what happened. Elimelech died, his 2 sons died. It was a place of total disaster for the family. That always shows us the grass is not always greener on the other side, is it? And the grass may look good, but you still got to mow it, don't you? Yeah, it's amazing how it works that way. And so here, this famine has come, and maybe he's feeling the pressure. So what do you do when it happens? When you face a problem like this, the problem of a famine, a problem of a job, whatever it may be, what do you do? Well, you've got to remain focused. Verse 54, when the 7 years of famine began to come, and Joseph said, the famine was in all the land, as Joseph had said, and the famine was in all the lands, but in the land of Egypt there was bread. Now, see, in those 7 years of plenty, Joseph kept his eyes on the big picture. What would have happened if Joseph would have had the wrong priorities? What would have happened if Joseph just kicked back and played golf and rested and just did what he wanted to do in those 7 years of plenty and didn't plan? Well, he'd have been in a bad way, wouldn't he? Because he wouldn't have been prepared. And see, we have to get to the place where we focus on the big picture. And the big picture in our life is to keep our eyes upon Christ. And to keep growing in Him, to keep developing in Him, because God allows the problems in our life to make us not bitter, but make us better, and to grow us in Him. And so Joseph had to have the right priorities. And we too must have the right priorities, that we are preparing ourselves spiritually. We all go through mountaintop experiences and we go through valley experiences. That's just the Christian life. And in every experience, no matter what it is, we stay consistent. We stay in the Word. We stay in our walk with God, and we keep it where it ought to be. What are we doing? We are storing up. We are preparing ourselves for those spiritual letdowns, those times that come in life. Hey, you know what? There may come a time in your life when you get sick and you don't even feel like opening your Bible to read. Have you ever been that way? You just feel so bad. You need those times of spiritual reserve to help you in those times. I mean, it's amazing. I wish people could see that. Focusing on what is right and focusing on where they need to be spiritually. And it's always been this way since the birth of the church on the day of Pentecost. There's always been people who are too busy for church. It's nothing new to us. It's nothing new in our generation. It's always been that way. But it's sad to see that, isn't it? You know, I saw a family the couple 2 or 3 weeks ago. They had visited here a couple times, but as far as I know, they don't go anywhere. They're just too busy. They're just too busy with kids doing this, that, and the other. But you know, at some point, there comes back a reaping day. And when you're too busy for God, you're just too busy. And so Joseph focused on what was important. And Joseph remained faithful to what's important. Faithfully, he just kept storing. Faithfully, he kept working. Faithfully, he kept doing what he was supposed to do. In fact, the Bible says it's required of a steward to be found faithful. He didn't quit when times got tough. He just kept plowing through it. And so you may have a problem sometime. Listen, just because you have nice things or whatever and we got a nice building and all this stuff doesn't mean that we never have problems, right? Right. Problems come in life, and we have to work through them. But then, this problem right here, the famine problem, the job problem, whatever you want to call it, that's nothing compared to the problem that's coming. Old Joseph has a problem, and it's coming to see him. And our problems sometimes have a way of doing that. And in chapter 42, it reminds me of a lady, and this book was not a Christian book by no means whatsoever, and it was called The Glass Castle. And it was Jeanette, I can't think of her last name. Anyway, Walls? Yeah, Jeanette Walls had written this book, and it was an adventure in itself. It was a memoir of her and her family. And they had traveled everywhere. Her dad was originally from Welch, West Virginia, which is in McDowell County, and right beside War. You ever been to War? Yeah. Anyway, it's right beside War. Anyway, so he was from Welch, and she ended up growing up there, went to high school there. They couldn't wait to get out of there. I mean, the first bus they could get to New York, they took off and went to New York. So it was one day, she worked for some big newspaper. She was a columnist for a big newspaper. She was on TV doing things and whatnot. And she had totally escaped her West Virginia place. Her mom and dad, I mean, her mom was educated, but they just lived rough. I mean, rough. They had no running water. They had no electricity. I mean, at school, she had to eat out of garbage cans. I mean, it was bad. And so that's the reason then they got out of there. So here she is one day. Now I'm leading up to Joseph, so I didn't forget Joseph. So here we are. She's attained all of this stuff. She tells no one about where she's from. She even got rid of the West Virginia twang and dialect. I mean, it's gone. And she's very articulate, and she's very focused on how she speaks and things. So one day, though, she hears on the television's on, and she's in her New York apartment, and she hears about a big traffic jam or something going on the highway leading to New York. And there was this old, dilapidated truck broke down, and these people were out fussing and fighting it was a mess. And she thought, that sounds like my family. And it was. They were moving in to New York where she was at. It's like the Beverly Hillbillies just coming in, buddy. Oh, Joseph now. Joseph's got a problem coming. And his problem stems from the fact there was a famine, but now he's got a problem coming, and it's called family. And they're coming to sing. So in chapter 42, verse 6 and 7, now Joseph was governor of the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed before him with their faces to the earth. Joseph saw his brothers and recognized them. Hey, listen, he's been there now 20 years. He was there 13. He was made vice regent, and then he's been there 7, the years of plenty, and now so he's been there 20 years. He's 37 years old. He's probably not even thought about seeing his brothers again. I'm sure he thought about his dad, but he thought, I'm not going to see these guys again. And look how God brought them back in his life. Isn't it amazing how God makes us face things that we thought we would never ever face? How God brings those things back to us. Because relationships are a part of life. We all have them. We all have relationships. Be that with a spouse, be that with our children, if you still have parents living, if you have siblings, we all have relationships. Now let's just be real. Sometimes relationships and family, there's a problem. And sometimes we have to learn how to deal with those problems. And so God brought all this back to Joseph and laid it in his lap. So what's going to happen? Well, Joseph saw his brothers, and he had to deal with the issue of past emotions. I mean, can you imagine what Joseph must have been feeling? The last time he saw his brothers, he was being shackled and chained and dragged off by slave traders, watching them, laughing and mocking him. And now all of a sudden, here they are bowed before him. Can you imagine, folks? What's running through this man's mind? How he's dealing with these emotions. And that's the reason the Bible says, let all bitterness and wrath and anger and clamor and evil speaking be put away from you with all malice. See, I personally think that Joseph had dealt with this a long time ago. The place of forgiveness and the place where he put outside resentment and vengeance and anger. See, the thing about forgiveness, though, is that it can be a process. See, the thing is, you never forgive someone when you feel like doing it, because you'll never feel like doing it. No, we forgive because we're commanded to forgive. That's a command. It's not a suggestion he gives. It's a command. We forgive because we're commanded to forgive. But even after you've done that, it's a process, because sometimes you have to go back and just start all over again. Because we're not perfect. We're weak. We're fallible. I remember dealing with some issues with my dad. And usually when I have people make a list of people they need to forgive, Dad's usually number 1 or number 2. That's just how it is. And so Dad was on my list, and so I dealt with some issues with my dad, and I remember being in a hotel room in Sioux City, Iowa one night. couldn't sleep. And God just began to work my heart over again about some other issues with my dad that I thought I had dealt with. And so there in that hotel room that night, I dealt with more issues with my dad. Really issues with me. And came again to that place of forgiveness. There is a process that's involved in all this. So here he is dealing with these past emotions. And God, during this time that we're in right now, with Thanksgiving, Christmas coming up, with all this, God may bring you face to face with the issue of some past emotions that he wants you to deal with. He wants to bring you to that place of forgiveness. That place where you've let resentment go and bitterness go and anger go. And you don't allow something in the past manipulate how you feel today. You don't allow your past to control your present. Or because of what someone's done to you, that you let them control how you feel. And then he had to deal with the issue of past actions. I mean, listen, what they had done to them. I mean, and we know, now Joseph, they come before him and remember that they get accused of stealing. And one brother ends up having to stay. I mean, he puts them through the ringer. I mean, listen, their emotions are messed up now. I mean, they're kind of shaken. I mean, because they don't know they're dealing with their little brother. They think they're dealing with this high up figure of Egypt, which they are. And so, man, listen, they're messed up now. Now, Joseph wasn't doing this to get back at him. He wasn't doing it because he's being vengeful and resentful to him. He was doing what he was doing to test them to see if they were the same or had they changed. Had something taken place in their life? And so the question for us is, how do we deal with people who hurt us? Do we get even? Well, that doesn't help matters, does it? You know, I've learned something about people, and that is people who have hurt us sometimes, they really don't have a sense of what they've done. It's just like they block it out. Yeah, they hurt you, but that's their life. They live to hurt people. They have been so hurt themselves, they're desensitized to it, and so they can easily hurt somebody else without even feeling anything about it. We're the ones carrying all the stuff. They just go on with life. They may not even acknowledge or they just refuse to acknowledge. But it doesn't give me a license to seek revenge on them. Joseph either. So Joseph had some problems, didn't he? Oh, just because he had the mansion. Just because he had all the money. Just because he had the title. Problems still came. And you're going to face problems. And they could come like Joseph's, or they could come in a different way. And the question is, how long am I going to face problems? As long as I got breath. We're going to face problems as long as we got breath in our lungs. And they may be different problems, and you may handle them differently now than what you did 40 years ago, or 10 years ago, or 5 years ago. Hopefully you will, because you've grown through that. But every problem ought to lead us into a greater reliance upon God. Not to panic, but to trust. And the problems that God allows in our lives are stepping stones in our walk with God. Yeah. And He's teaching us how to rely on Him, how to look to Him. So no matter how big your problem is, no matter what face they have, or no matter what it could be something I've not even addressed. But listen, understand, God wants to use that problem to make you better and to grow you in Him. Now, for a person who doesn't know Christ, their biggest problem is the fact that they don't know Christ. The biggest problem they have is that they have that disease of sin, and they've never ever come to the place of being born again and trusting Jesus. That's the biggest problem they have. And it's up to us to help them see that's their problem. And then they can put their faith and trust in Jesus. So don't ever buy into the fact, if I just had this, my problems would be over. If I could attain that, my problem would be over. Nah, you're always going to have problems, and what you have doesn't make any difference. None whatsoever. Now, I know people put stuff on social media. People that you know, people in your neighborhood, people perhaps you've gone to school with, and you look at their little social media things and you think, man, they don't have a problem in the world. Lies, all lies. I'm telling you right now, there's no truth to that. It's a facade. It's a facade. They got problems too. Yeah. But the thing is, as you go through your life and your problem, you have someone who walks with you, who guides you. And you, get this, you have a church family who will love you and support you and help you any way they possibly can if you would allow them to. Let's bow our heads and close our eyes this morning.